welcome to the Geek Legion of Doom. This is going to be a top 10 list, a personal top 10 list, let me just emphasise this, of my favourite trilogies. Now, this was inspired by Aaran over at Screenstars, so if you haven't already, please go and check out his list. He did this top 10 and it made me think about it, and I wanted to do it as well. So go and check out Aaran's video if you haven't. Before we get into this, we have to talk about what we're talking about as a trilogy here, because as Arran says in his video, I think you have to establish some kind of rules. So what do you count as a trilogy? Now, he gave the example of Indiana Jones, where there is 4 films, all from a continuous kind of like, with the same characters. Could you count that as a trilogy? I'm going to say no. For a trilogy, you can't just say, oh, it's the first three films of a series. To me, a trilogy has to be a really follow a complete arc, or follow a character's arc and have a definitive beginning and end. And this makes it a little bit confusing. So, you know, an easy trilogy would be like the Back to the Future trilogy. It starts with one film, ends with the third film. It won't be on my list because I'm not a huge fan of that trilogy, I'm not going to lie to you. But there are certain films, for example, I was considering putting the Living Dead films, you know, Night of the Living Dead, of which I believe there is 5 official ones. And even though each film has its own individual characters, there's no through line really outside of the zombies, you know, I thought I can't really have it because there's not really, you know, it's, it definitely continues after the third film. You know, you've got like the Survival of the Living Dead, Land of the Dead, and to me that is kind of like, you can't just say the first 3. So I've tried to kind of limit this to films where there is a definite 3-film arc. There's one in here which maybe kind of breaks my own rule to a point, and I nearly didn't put it in, but I just thought most people would consider it a trilogy, so I'm going to keep it in there. So anyway, without further ado, let me crack on. So number 10, coming at number 10, this is going to be the Conjuring trilogy. Now, we are currently talking about the main series of the Conjuring. I love the first movie, I really like the second movie, and I thought the third movie was kind of average. So there's 2 pretty damn good movies and 1 average movie. To me, still makes for a pretty good trilogy of films. And I always say the trilogy, the Conjuring films are the best films, I would say. If I ever get asked what is a great introduction to horror, it's the Conjuring films. Now, I put it at lower in the list because I do think that third film does kind of take it down a peg or 2. So moving on to number 9, and this one might be controversial, and this is the Hangover films. I love them. I laughed my arse off with every single one of these movies. Yes, the first one is hands down the best. Yes, the second one is more of a kind of a remake of the first, and the third one is a completely different, and it probably has a little bit too much plot and is too different from the first 2 movies. But nonetheless, I really enjoyed the characters. I laughed out loud with these films. I find them very rewatchable, particularly the kind of the first one. And, you know, they're probably one of my favourite kind of comedy series. Number 8 is the Dark Knight trilogy. I don't love these as much as a lot of other people. I know probably other people will have their lists, you know, this higher up the list. I still do enjoy them, hence why they're on the list. But I don't find them as rewatchable. But they are, without doubt, particularly well made, and probably one of some of the best superhero movies that have been made. Talking about superheroes, this might be controversial, it's above the Dark Knight, but this is my personal list, and that is the Blade trilogy. I love the original Blade. It's actually probably my number 2 favourite superhero movie. Maybe even number 1 at times. The original Blade movie, I love so much. I think it's so good. I really, really like the second movie as well. Maybe not quite as the first, but I really do enjoy the second film. And despite a lot of people, I actually still quite like the third one. Yes, the third one I think is the weakest, but I actually quite like the concept of Blade versus Dracula. I do think Ryan Reynolds is kind of quite funny in that movie, and I do really like Parker Posey's Danica character. And there are a couple of fun scenes involving Dracula, though I do think he was miscast. But nonetheless, I really enjoyed the Blade trilogy of movies, and they are one of my favourite superhero properties. Number 6, and that is the John Wick trilogy. Now, I'm slightly cheating with this one because I know that there is a 4th one coming out, but as of this video, there's 3 films, so therefore it counts as a trilogy. This one is obviously going to be time sensitive because it no longer will be, strictly speaking, a trilogy once that 4th film comes out, but they are excellent, you know, action movies. Obviously John Wick now becoming really quite the pop culture icon, and cemented Keanu Reeves' place in kind of action movie cinema. Number 5, the Dollar Trilogy. We're talking obviously Clint Eastwood's 3 movies, obviously, that are loosely connected. Now, again, this one, it's called a trilogy, but the films are kind of separate. You know, it's somewhat ambiguous if Clint Eastwood is playing the same character. You know, you could argue he isn't, or, you know, some people might argue that he is. But nonetheless, they are considered a trilogy. And, you know, obviously, I think these are so influential movies. And I saw a thing once where, you know, people sort of said, oh, you know, what's one of the most influential soundtracks? I would say you have to talk about this movie, this series of movies in that sort of conversation, because I think those, you know, that kind of soundtrack is infinite, you know, instantly recognisable, and I think it's kind of overlooked in favour of kind of John Williams and everything like that. But nonetheless, they're great cinematic masterpieces, and they just ooze charisma. And let's move on to number 4, and we're talking the Evil Dead trilogy. So we're talking the first 3 movies. Obviously, I know that there was a TV show, and I know there was a remake, but obviously we still have the 3 films, 3 kind of cinematic films. And for the longest time, Evil Dead 2 was my favourite movie. And I really, really enjoyed the first one. I'm less keen on the 3rd one, to be honest with you, The Army of the Dead. It's similar in a way to what I said about The Conjuring. I think the 3rd movie is only kind of mediocre, but I love the first 2 movies so much. That's why that is in the kind of a little bit higher up in the list. Number 3, this is actually the Captain America trilogy with Chris Evans. So I think all 3 of these movies are excellent, particularly The Winter Soldier being the highlight. But even so, the first film and obviously the Civil War, the 3rd movie, probably the best, most consistent superhero trilogy, I would say, certainly for me. And, you know, I think Captain America has really now become one of the most popular worldwide characters, not just in America, thanks to some superb filmmaking. Number 2, we are talking the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Now, obviously, I know you can say, oh, the Hobbit films, you know, came before this, and, you know, obviously set before this and all that. But obviously, we're focusing on characters that have that journey from the Lord of the Rings, you know, Frodo, Aragorn, all that kind of stuff. That's their arc. And I know you've got the supporting characters like Gandalf, etc., that could have appeared in both trilogies. But the Lord of the Rings is a good example where there's a kind of overreaching kind of arc, but nonetheless it's a definite trilogy of films with characters going on that kind of that journey from beginning to the end, and therefore I would definitely say you could let's say trilogy rather than a kind of series of 6 films necessarily, maybe 2 sets of trilogies. And number 1 is Star Wars, the original trilogy. This is the one where I felt maybe it was a little bit of a cheat, because obviously you've got the prequels and now the sequels, so there's 9 films, and they do have the same, it is this kind of one story. And this is why I was a little bit kind of like, do I put Star Wars in here? Because I feel out of all the ones I've said, this has the most expansive arc outside of its 3 films. Obviously you've got Vader's journey in the kind of or Anakin's journey in the first 3 films. And then you've got, Leia, Han and Luke in the sequel trilogy as well. So to me, I was like, oh, do I put this in? But how I sort of settled on it was the first 3 movies were made, you know, without kind of like any kind of sequels or prequels in mind at that point. I know George Lucas said it, but I don't believe that. And that was considered the trilogy, And I think if you talk to most people, they would consider that the trilogy. And I think if I didn't put it in, it would seem weird. Even though I think this one, out of all the ones I've mentioned, is the kind of arguably the one which is more of a film series. But I think because they were made, you know, so long ago, and people do refer to this as a trilogy, I'm going to keep it. And that to me, every sort of frame of those 3 movies, I love. So that's why they're number 1, because I think they're classics, and I can rewatch that trilogy time and time again. And I have. When I was a kid, I used to watch these films all the time, day after day, and I never used to get bored of them. And you know, they kind of made me the kind of more of the geek that I am today. If it wasn't for Star Wars, I probably, you know, wouldn't be interested in so much geek culture. And I don't like the prequels, I don't like the sequels, but I love the original trilogy. So that is my top 10 list. What did you think? Is there anything that surprises you? What is your top 10? Oh, obviously, it's not a tag, but if you want to do a top 10 trilogy, let us know, you know, do a thing, or just let us know in the comments. And thank you to Aaron for inspiring this video. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.